What's up, everyone? Tonight, we're stepping into the authentic Wild West. I'm not talking about the movie version with its noble gunfighters and epic duels at sunset, but the brutal, unforgiving truth where making it through another day was far from certain. You might believe you could handle whatever the frontier throws at you, but there's a good reason it earned that wild reputation. If these stories resonate with you, hitting that like button or subscribing would mean the world to me. It genuinely makes a difference. I'm also really interested to know where in the world you're watching from. So leave a comment telling me your location and your current time. It's amazing watching our worldwide community come together over these tales. All right, go ahead and dim those lights, maybe get some white noise going in the background, and let's settle in for tonight's exploration. We're about to discover exactly why someone from our modern world wouldn't make it through a single day on the untamed American frontier. Welcome. You've just opened your eyes in the American Wild West, circa 1,870 seconds. On the bright side, you're living through one of history's most famous eras. On the not-so-bright side, your odds of seeing tomorrow just plummeted. Your first obstacle arrives before you're even fully conscious: the odor. We're not discussing some pleasant scent of wilderness and pine trees, but rather an overpowering assault on your senses, the reek of bodies that haven't seen soap in weeks, animal waste scattered everywhere, and what's unmistakably human sewage permeating everything. Personal hygiene simply wasn't high on anyone's priority list out west. Most people living on the frontier viewed a full body wash as something you did once a month if you were lucky. Others avoided it entirely through the cold season. Water had value, and wasting it on cleaning seemed foolish when survival depended on having enough to drink and prepare meals. As you pull yourself up from your sleeping arrangement, probably nothing more than a bug-infested mattress stuffed with straw, you notice how your entire body screams in protest. Frontier existence meant brutal physical work from sunrise to sunset. There were no such things as days off, paid time away, or anyone concerned about whether the work might injure you. Relentless labor that twisted spines and destroyed joints before people reached 40. Most folks were lucky to reach their mid-30s. Standing there, you feel the temperature extremes. Winter months could see the inside of your dwelling drop to dangerous levels below zero. Summer offered no relief either, just oppressive heat with nowhere to escape. The weather ruled everything, and you just endured it. Your belly reminds you it needs food. Better get used to beans, hard biscuits, and whatever passes for coffee. That's probably going to be your menu for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Frontier eating was repetitive and lacked proper nutrition. Anything fresh, like fruit or vegetables, only appeared during certain seasons. When you got meat, it was heavily salted or smoked, since there was no way to keep it cold. Vitamin C deficiency led to scurvy, a disease where your gums bleed and teeth loosen, which was widespread even though it's incredibly easy to prevent with today's knowledge. That coffee everyone's drinking? It's nothing like what you're used to. They boil it endlessly until it's almost tar, impossibly bitter, sometimes throwing in crushed eggshells or a pinch of salt trying to make it drinkable. Before you step outside, you'd better shake out those boots thoroughly. Scorpions and rattlesnakes have a habit of crawling into warm places overnight. One careless moment, and you're dealing with a potentially fatal bite, with the nearest doctor possibly days away on horseback. Maybe you're thinking a frontier settlement would provide some safety. In some ways, yes. In many others, it just swaps one set of dangers for another. These towns were breeding grounds for disease. Nobody understood germs yet, and there were no proper waste systems, so sickness tore through populations like wildfire. Cholera, typhoid, smallpox, diphtheria, tuberculosis, all of them constant companions. A single outbreak could reduce a town's population by half in a matter of weeks. Walking toward town, you notice how chaotic everything looks. Buildings went up wherever someone felt like putting them. The roads are packed, dirt, mud pits during rain, dust storms when dry. Everywhere you look, there's horse manure. These animals provided all the transportation, and nobody was cleaning up after them. In some places, the accumulation reached your knees in the busiest areas. The flies alone would drive you insane. Those saloons everyone talks about? Another source of death. These weren't the polished establishments with fancy bartenders you've seen on screen. They were rough wooden shacks serving liquor that was barely fit for consumption, raw spirits cut with tobacco spit, hot peppers, turpentine, sometimes gunpowder to give it more kick. One bad batch could leave you blind. And violence? Constant. Men got drunk, arguments got heated, and in a society where everyone carried weapons, things turned fatal fast. Healthcare would absolutely terrify you. Qualified doctors were scarce, and many who claimed the title had almost no real training. Maybe they'd apprenticed briefly or attended medical school for a few months. What they knew about medicine was primitive at best, still relying on outdated theories about body humors that belonged in the Middle Ages, not approaching modern science. When professional help wasn't available, people turned to folk remedies and home treatments. Some communities had local healers, usually women, drawing on traditional knowledge. Certain herbal treatments actually worked, but plenty did nothing or made situations worse. Standard medical practice included deliberately making patients bleed, dosing them with mercury that poisoned them, or administering arsenic treatments that killed as often as they helped. Pregnant women faced a 1 in 4 chance of dying during childbirth in isolated areas. If you needed a tooth pulled, they'd do it without any pain relief, using whatever pliers-like tools were available. The smallest injury could spiral into a death sentence. Infections ran rampant since nobody properly sterilized anything. Broken limbs often healed crooked, leaving people in chronic pain for life. When people said only the tough survived, they meant it literally. Thinking about trying your luck mining for gold? Picture this. You're standing in freezing mountain streams for hours, hunched over sifting through sediment, or you're underground hacking away at unstable rock with no safety measures whatsoever. Tunnel collapses buried men alive regularly. The air in mines filled with invisible toxic fumes that suffocated workers without warning. When they used explosives to break through rock, accidents were routine. Lost limbs, blindness, instant death. The lasting health damage was even worse. Breathing in microscopic rock particles destroyed lungs over time, suffocating miners slowly through silicosis. Processing gold with mercury caused brain damage and tremors. And after all that risk, most miners earned barely enough to survive, around $2 or $3 for 10 to 12 hours of hellish work per day. What about cattle ranching? Droughts killed pasture lands and dried up water sources. One bad winter could wipe out your entire herd. During the catastrophic winter of 1886 to 1887. Up to 90% of cattle on northern ranges died from cold and starvation. Stampedes were another nightmare. Thousands of panicked animals weighing over half a ton each became an unstoppable wave of death. Cowboys caught underneath got crushed, and they were only making $30 a month for that dangerous life. Farming sounds better, right? Wrong. The prairie ground was nearly impossible to plow through dense root systems built up over centuries. Locust swarms appeared without warning and devoured every living plant. Droughts destroyed entire seasons of crops. The physical toll on farmers' bodies was permanent. Backs gave out, joints wore down, and the loneliness out there drove people literally insane. Depression and what they called prairie madness were epidemic among settlers. Getting around in the 1,870 seconds bears no resemblance to modern travel. The Transcontinental Railroad existed by then, but unless you had serious money, you couldn't use it. Most people rode horses if they could afford one, traveled by wagon, or simply walked. Even riding a horse wasn't pleasant. Saddles back then prioritized function over comfort. Hours in the saddle left riders covered in painful blisters. Horses spooked at everything. A snake, a sudden sound and getting thrown could mean broken bones or worse, miles from anyone who could help. Wagons were torture devices on wheels. With no real suspension, you felt every single bump and hole in the trail. The constant jarring made people sick. Wagons broke constantly, wheels split, axles snapped, leaving you stranded in the middle of nowhere. The famous Oregon Trail? That 2,000-mile journey was a death march for many. Out of roughly 400,000 people who attempted it, about 1 in 10 never made it. Some historians estimate a grave every 350 feet for the entire route. Disease killed most of them, cholera especially, which could transform a healthy adult into a corpse within hours. River crossings drowned families. People accidentally shot themselves or others constantly, since most had no idea how to handle firearms properly. Short trips weren't much safer. Flash floods appeared from nowhere. Desert heat killed through dehydration and heat stroke. Winter blizzards trapped travelers, leading to nightmares like the Donner Party, where survivors had to eat the dead to live. The West attracted people from everywhere. Chinese laborers building railroads, Mexican families who'd lived there for generations, black cowboys who made up a quarter of ranch hands in some areas, immigrants from all over Europe, and the Native American nations who'd called these lands home for thousands of years. But this diversity came with ugly realities. Chinese workers faced horrible discrimination and got assigned the most dangerous railroad jobs for less money than white workers. Mexican landowners had their property stolen through legal manipulation or outright force. Black Americans discovered that frontier prejudice was just as bad as what they'd fled in the South, despite their essential contributions to building the West. Opportunities were denied, communities excluded them. For Native peoples, this wasn't expansion, it was apocalypse. Indigenous populations crashed from approximately 15 million to under 300,000 by 1900, destroyed by disease, war, forced relocation, and the intentional elimination of their food supply, especially buffalo. Government policy systematically stole native lands and forced tribes onto reservations in the worst territories. Children were kidnapped from their families and sent to boarding schools specifically designed to destroy their cultures, operating under the cruel motto, "Kill the Indian, save the man." Forget the helpless ladies of Western films. Real frontier women did backbreaking work while navigating a society that gave them almost no rights. They handled all the traditional housework, cooking, cleaning, raising children, making clothes, but also worked the fields, managed livestock, and defended homesteads when needed. Their days started before sunrise and ended long after dark, with no breaks. Even though they were absolutely essential, women couldn't vote, couldn't own property if married, couldn't keep their children if divorced. If a husband was abusive, there was essentially no legal help available. Childbirth was particularly terrifying. Women gave birth at home, maybe with a midwife present if they were fortunate. No prenatal checkups meant complications appeared during labor. When things went wrong, breech positions, hemorrhaging both mother and baby often died. Many women knew that each pregnancy could be their last day alive. Kids as young as 6 were expected to do real work that mattered. By their early teens, they were working as hard as adults. Nobody protected children from reality. They saw animals butchered, people die, violence erupt. School was inconsistent at best. Where it existed, one barely educated teacher handled every age from 5 to 17 in a single room that was freezing in winter and sweltering otherwise. Beatings were normal punishment for minor infractions like talking. In remote locations, formal education simply didn't exist. The child death rate was horrific. Roughly 1 in 4 didn't reach adulthood. Diseases we vaccinate against today killed routinely. Accidents took many more since childhood safety wasn't even a concept. Most kids watched multiple siblings die. The isolation broke people mentally. Mail took weeks or months if it arrived at all. News was ancient by the time it reached you. Families who moved west often never saw their relatives again. The loneliness contributed to widespread depression, alcoholism, and suicide across frontier populations. Law enforcement barely existed. One sheriff might be responsible for thousands of square miles, making regular patrols impossible. When crime happened, communities often formed vigilante mobs rather than waiting for legal processes. Get accused of stealing a horse? You could be hanging from a tree by evening, whether you actually did it or not. Those dramatic gunfights from movies? Almost entirely fiction. Real violence was sudden, ugly, usually alcohol-fueled. Bar fights that turned fatal, domestic abuse, disputes over land that was actual frontier violence. The shootout at the OK Corral everyone knows about? That happened because people refused to follow a weapons ordinance, not because of some honorable duel. Punishment was severe. Hanging for murder, rape, and sometimes just theft, especially horses or cattle. Prisons existed, but were brutal places where disease and violence killed prisoners regularly. Why did people become obsessed with a fantasy version of this brutal period? Timing explains much of it. The hardest mythology building happened right as the real frontier was vanishing. Buffalo Bill started his Wild West shows in the 1,880 seconds, staging fake Indian battles and stagecoach robberies for audiences back east, while actual frontier regions were being connected by railroads and telegraph lines. Cheap novels spread exaggerated stories about Western heroes, mostly written by people back east who'd never actually experienced frontier life. Then Hollywood came along and refined these myths even further, creating images, lone cowboys, heroic lawmen, evil outlaws, savage Indians that had barely any connection to what really happened. These stories served a purpose beyond entertainment. They made Americans feel good about their national identity during uncertain times, suggested that expansion westward was not just inevitable, but morally right, and provided simple good versus evil narratives that justified American power. What got hidden was the complicated, morally messy truth: the genocide of indigenous peoples, the exploitation of immigrant workers, the environmental destruction, the corporate corruption of politics, and the struggling communities full of people who didn't fit into simple hero or villain categories. The real West doesn't offer clean moral lessons. It shows how humans adapt to harsh conditions, sometimes through cooperation and creativity, sometimes through exploitation and cruelty. After experiencing this journey through the authentic Wild West, you understand perfectly why modern people wouldn't last a single day in 1,870 seconds frontier conditions. The specific skills, physical toughness, and mental strength required to survive represent a lifestyle so removed from contemporary experience that it's almost like another planet. You've witnessed the unvarnished truth, the overwhelming stench that never left, the endless physical labor that destroyed bodies prematurely, the nutrient-poor diet that caused deficiency diseases, the primitive health care where simple wounds became fatal, the deadly nature of every occupation, whether you dug for gold, raised cattle, or farmed land, the psychological isolation that pushed people toward breakdown, the ever-present violence lurking everywhere, and the stark fact that survival wasn't automatic. You fought for it every single day, against hardships we can barely imagine today. The frontier's legacy goes deeper than myths, into the actual systems and structures shaping modern America. But understanding it accurately means recognizing both the bravery of those who built new communities against incredible odds and the destruction experienced by those who were displaced and destroyed by that same expansion. The real narrative doesn't center on shootouts and treasure hunts, but on everyday people facing extreme challenges with whatever limited resources they possessed. Their genuine story, stripped of Hollywood polish, contains more than enough actual bravery, heartbreak, and perseverance to fill libraries. The authentic Wild West was where human fragility and strength showed themselves equally, where survival demanded constant awareness, where comfort rarely appeared and luxury was basically unknown, and where death accompanied daily life, rather than hiding in the distance. Next time you're watching a Western or reading frontier fiction, remember, you're seeing a cleaned-up, oversimplified version of reality. Appreciate the incredible security and comfort of modern existence, built on technological progress that frontier people couldn't have dreamed of. And remember that the people who shaped the American West weren't perfect heroes from myth, but complicated human beings confronting extraordinary challenges. Their real story demonstrates what humans can endure when they absolutely must.